At the South Pole, there are countless ways to die. Freezing, starvation, walking off a cliff.
But what about murder?
We're doing a full recap of the secret history of Antarctica on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
Before we get to the show, just a reminder to subscribe to our Patreon.
It's patreon.com/so-much-crime, so little time. We post all kinds of fun stuff there, including extended clips, bonus content,
Random tangents that we go on.
and we'll also send you some swag. Thank you for signing up. And also, don't forget, if you haven't yet, please rate us on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen.
And tell your friends, your frenemies, your moms, your dads, anyone who'll listen.
And now let's get to the show. Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Dee. And before we start, warning, there will be spoilers in this episode. We're talking about the full podcast, The Secret History of Antarctica.
If you haven't listened yet, check out our preview episode on the show. It's the one before this one in your feed. And you'll also find a link for The Secret History of Antarctica in our show notes.
Okay, let's do a quick recap of The Secret History of Antarctica. It came out in February of 2024.
There are 6 total episodes, and the host is investigative journalist Stephen Davis.
In our preview episode, we introduced the story. In Antarctica in May of 2000, Dr. Rodney Marks, an astrophysicist, suddenly got very sick and died. Was he murdered? Not sure.
All right, Dee, let's discuss.
Okay, Jeff.
All right, so we talked about episode 1 last time. Episode 2, let's do a quick summary of what happens in the rest of this series. So episode 2 is called The Doctor. This one's really about the last days of Rodney's life up into his death. He gets very sick very suddenly. We hear about the efforts to save his life that are ultimately unsuccessful. Episode 3 is called The Cop. This is about the investigation into Dr. Rodney Marks' death, or kind of the lack thereof. We hear about a cop from New Zealand named Grant Wormald who worked on the case, but he didn't really get anywhere. There were no real help from other governments, and kind of no real teeth to the investigation. Episode 4 is called Madhouse at the End of the Earth. This one is...
What a great name for an episode.
It's a great name for an episode. This one's really about kind of what happens at Antarctica, more generally speaking, the type of people that come there. There's a great quote from someone saying, "We're all here because we're not all there." We also hear a good amount about the people in Antarctica. Generally, it's an environment that is hostile to women and about the horrible things that happen to women in this environment.
How very unique.
Episode 5 is called The Coroner's Verdict. And this is when we hear that once the coroner finally was able to examine the body, we learn that...
6 months after he died.
Yes. We learned that he died of methanol poisoning. And we learn a fair amount about what methanol and why it's real bad. And then the last episode is called Theories, and this is where our host, Stephen Davis, really runs through all the possible causes of Dr. Marks' death, including suicide, an accident, murder, and then if it's murder, what are the possible motives? And then also, if the doctor was at fault, how that might be. And that's it. Did I miss anything, Dee?
No, I think that was a pretty good summary. Okay, Jeff, tell me, what were your thoughts?
This was a really unusually constructed podcast.
Indeed. Tell me more.
Well, I kept waiting for the sort of big reveal of like the murder accusations, whether it was coming from the host or coming from the friends or colleagues who were there. And I feel like that just kept getting held back and held back and held back. And the last episode, Theories, was ostensibly the one where it all sort of ties together. But I feel like even in that one, no one like comes out and says, yeah, this was murder. Here's who did it. Here's why. You never really get that.
I disagree with the first part that you're saying about you're always looking for that little bit more and you're kind of waiting. I really enjoyed so much like learning about the history of it. I really I found it it was like a unique setting for me. I hadn't read up much on Antarctica before, so even hearing about getting in and getting out, hearing about all the investigations or all the legal issues with international who owns the problem, basically, whose duty of care is it to look into, who's responsible to look into any crime that happens there, and why it's so hard. I enjoyed hearing all of that, but I do agree with you that I felt like the last episode was going to bring something to me. In fact, I texted you after, I think, episode 2 with my speculation, and it was never even brought up. I felt like they were going to get somewhere. Like, we've had so many cold cases that we have, podcasts we've listened to, but there's always some sort of speculation. And I don't know, I couldn't figure out, was this trying to be respectful that we can't just randomly speculate because there's just not enough evidence for it? But also, what's the point of the podcast then?
That's an interesting question. I actually wrote down as one of my questions. So this crime happened more than 20 well, we actually don't even know if it was a crime, right? At the end of it, we don't, like, he could have died accidentally.
Yes. So
That's
he
possible.
died 24 years ago.
Yeah. And this journalist, Stephen Davis, the host of the podcast, has been investigating this for decades. And so one of the questions I had was like, why release this now? Like, he could have released it 10 years ago. I don't know that we've learned anything new in the last 10 years. He could have released it 10 years from now. I don't know what else there is that we're going to ever learn about this case. There's no kind of new revelations or breakthroughs that happen now. So it seems sort of random to come out now.
Yeah, I don't fully agree. Like, I feel that it is a story worth telling. That there's a mystery, and, you know, the setting of it is so unique. A lot of people would be interested in it, and there is a lot to discuss. I suppose it's more, for me, it's more in the structure and the format of the podcasts leads you to believe that you're going to get something more from the ending. So I've no problem that the story was released now, or the podcast was released now. I feel like there was a story worth telling here, and I actually think he did a pretty good job at telling the story. I just felt a little bit misled. I felt that we were going in thinking at least we'd have some strong theory at the end, or a couple of strong theories, and we really didn't. And what I think what annoyed me most is, I think in episode 5, there are like these speculative comments made from a few different people who had been there at the time, as well as Rodney's sister, who hadn't been there at the time. But we never hear what this speculation is. And I couldn't figure out, is this a respect thing? In fact, one of the guys, you know, I can't remember his name. The guy, he had a theory. And he said his sister had Rodney's sister had a very similar theory. But yet we didn't get told what the theory was. And again, I don't know whether it's like, obviously we can say allegedly this happened, or they could say what someone was speculating. I don't know. It just felt a bit unfinished. Even if they said they have a theory, but they're still working on it and we might come back, or they have a theory, but there's too many loose ends. Sorry, I'm going on a big rant here. But it just felt unfinished.
It felt unfinished. I do think at the same time, it was a very fascinating story. And it's such an interesting place. And we learned so many interesting things.
Stop saying interesting. Get us the source.
Oh my gosh. One of the things that I wanted to call attention to was that episode 4, The Madhouse at the End of the Earth, where we hear about what's happened to women over the years in Antarctica.
We said this in the preview.
Yes. So in the preview, we learned that at the research center that Dr. Marks was at, there were 50 people. 42 men, 8 women. And that is seemingly
never going to end well.
Yeah, not an unusual ratio. And in episode 4, we hear about kind of this wolf pack mentality, a culture of rape and assault, that 59% of women who worked in Antarctica have reported harassment or assault.
Can we just note that that's reported?
Yes. And we hear from a woman who goes by Jane here, who basically experienced classic victim blaming and kind of diminishing of what happened to her. And it seems like or maybe it's not an implication, I think it's said somewhat outright, is that there is a culture of sort of covering this up, right? First of all, there's a culture of this happening.
There's a culture of the secret.
Yeah.
Going back to the name of it.
And I think I would sort of extrapolate that to maybe that's one of my key takeaways here is that what happened in this case with Dr. Marks is maybe emblematic of what happens in Antarctica. It's hard for me to say.
Yeah, and they do say that in the winter in Antarctica, what happens in Antarctica stays in Antarctica.
Which is a cliched saying, I know, but
But I think most things stay there because they can't leave.
They can't leave. And another sort of metaphor for this that I thought was interesting that is not as grim as the one about women was about people getting sick. And this was from episode 2, where they talk about it being a closed ecosystem and how once basically the place closes down for the winter and everyone is basically stuck there for 6 months, there's no new viruses introduced. So once the viruses have sort of run their course, like the flu and cold viruses have gone through everybody, there's nothing left there's no other sicknesses that go around because it's a closed ecosystem, which also I think speaks to that issue of what happens in there by the time they sort of get out and leave, it's just all sort of left behind, and whether that's the bad things that have happened or whatever it might be.
And I got that for episode 4 when they were discussing the sexual assault.
Yeah.
But a part of me was a little bit confused by bringing that in as well. I feel like some of what was brought in, to me, again, I'm focused on Rodney's death. And some of it is still, it just doesn't fit. It's called The Secret of Antarctica, or The Secret History of Antarctica. So I understand that it's broadly about that, but the whole focus of it is on Rodney's death. And things are brought in, I don't know, are they there to build context? Because by all accounts, is it just the secret? Is that what we're trying to get out of that episode? And speaking about women who are going through these horrendous experiences and no one believing them or them having nowhere to turn to, or in one case being told you should talk it out with the perpetrator. Oh, great idea. Is it just to emphasize the secret? Because for me, it just didn't it's a story, and The Secrets of Antarctica is a story, but I thought this was The Secret of Antarctica focusing on Rodney's death, and it just didn't feel like that all maybe tied together.
No, I think that's true. It doesn't quite all tie together. It's one of those things, though. I think this is one where if I step back from it, I really appreciated and in a way enjoyed the journey. I learned so much.
That's true.
In the end, was it the fulfilling story with the kind of beginning, middle, and end that I hoped for? No, it wasn't. But I also, I learned so much in listening to these 6 episodes, and I've read books about Antarctica, right? But I walked away from this with so much new information that was fascinating, and not just about Antarctica. And there's a couple things that we haven't talked about that I want to touch on, but also like episode 5 where we learned about methanol. Methanol is one of those things. How much do you know about methanol and
methanol is ethanol's cousin. No, I knew nothing about either of them, but I did find that interesting, and I don't like science. Not that I don't like it. I've never had a brain that understood it. There were a lot of facts that were intriguing and that I learned from it, definitely. I totally agree with there. I don't know. You remember in our preview, I was saying how I was a bit baffled by the intro from episode 1.
The hammer.
Yeah, and the hammer story comes back, but it's so irrelevant. But then we don't hear about it until episode 4 or 5. And then even when we hear about it, it's like, okay, we hear about it and it's like, okay, that was a really fascinating, terrifying story. But it really has nothing to do with the entire podcast.
No, and sometimes I think this is the type of thing that you get when you investigate a story for so long, where you just build this collection of interesting sort of anecdotes, right? Like all kinds of interesting bits of information, and they're all related in that they all relate to Antarctica, but they're not really related to the story of Dr. Rodney Marks.
I feel like it was related. It's related in setting the scene of how something so small and something so minor. Like in that case, wasn't it the friend was ruining the endings of the stories?
Yeah.
Of all of the books.
Of books. Yes.
And that was such a small trigger for this person to be set off. And it's kind of showing this isn't a normal circumstance. You can't deal with it in a normal way. And like, we have to curate it. I've no problem with the story being there. I thought it was fascinating to hear. But why are we hearing about it at the intro as if it's central to the entire case? Because it's not.
It's not. No, that's a good point. It's an interesting story. And when it does come up and we hear that basically this hammer attack was the result of a guy spoiling the ends of books that his friend was trying to read, it's a fascinating story. But yeah, like to your point, we don't even get the resolution of that story. We don't know what happened to the guy who got hit with the hammer. We don't know what happened to the guy who had the hammer.
And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the whole focus of this podcast is really on the fact that you can never get a full story out of Antarctica because, as you said, like, it's a closed ecosystem. It's closed off to the rest of the world. It exists in a vacuum, and when that vacuum is lifted, it all kind of dissipates into air. Maybe that is what the whole focus is. I just felt that there was a few things they could have done differently to make this a stronger podcast.
I will say this. I do think I walked away from this feeling like I had enough of a sense of the environment, of the situation, that I feel like I could speculate on what I think happened with some level of confidence.
All right. Off you trot.
I will say, I wish we'd heard from a couple more key people who were close to the case.
Where's Sonia?
Where is Sonia, the girlfriend, the fiance?
She's mentioned at in the very last episode, just to say she often emails people around and asks them to contact Rodney's mother every year on his birthday. But other than that, like, why don't we hear her side? Maybe
I really
she
wanted
didn't,
to hear from her.
and maybe she didn't want to be on the podcast, which is totally fair. But we don't even hear that she didn't want to be on the podcast.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like, and going back to that speculation, I just feel like there's speculative comments made from a few different people, as I said. In West Cork, remember in West Cork, we heard so much speculation. There was a key person that everyone thought was guilty. But we also heard speculation from a lot of different people over the most minor things. I remember someone saying that they thought someone was odd, so they went to the police and said maybe they did it. Like, it was all of these really, really minor things. There was like a slew of speculation. And here we're missing that. And I felt like I was missing that. And I am left to speculate myself. And look, I love being a detective for these things. Maybe this podcast is designed not to speculate, but give you the information for you to speculate, possibly.
Yeah.
Maybe this information is omitted on purpose. I don't know.
Why? So you texted me early on. You hadn't gotten through the whole thing.
So in episode 2, my theory was it has to be the girlfriend. That was my theory, because she was with him the whole time.
But what's her motive?
Well, I don't know. He's like, if I'm going to be throwing out accusations here, he was like a rock star type of guy. He used to be like in a band or in the music industry. He's wild hair. Like, a lot of people love him. He's big into drinking. Maybe she didn't like that he was big into drinking. Maybe everyone was saying that they were like the perfect couple. Maybe they weren't. Often people aren't. There's no real such thing as a perfect couple. Maybe they were having trouble. I just felt she was with him the whole time. It felt like it fit for me.
Okay.
But
I didn't.
That was like episode 2.
By the end of it, you didn't think that anymore?
When I heard that she was still like trying to be in contact with the mother and everything, I thought, well, maybe not. But it nearly made me think she was, because we heard so little about her. Had the host found out anything about her, but there wasn't enough to say it? What is this guy David and Rodney's sister thinking? And why are they thinking that? What could Rodney's sister have heard enough to have a thought about? And in fact, David said right before, as he was speaking, there were things that he thought back over. Kind of obsessive stalking are 2 words that he used. And straight away, I'm thinking him. But then maybe what he's actually inferring to is maybe someone who is obsessed with Rodney's girlfriend and tries to get Rodney out of the picture.
So that was my theory.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because I was thinking, like, yes, what you said about Rodney and his girlfriend. Sure. This is wild speculation, and we don't know what we're talking about. And
Allegedly. We're saying allegedly after everything.
But we listened to this whole podcast, and we're invested in the story.
Exactly.
But if you think about the dynamics at play and what we've learned about how people do in this 6 month or 12 months total that they're in Antarctica at this research station. So you got 42 men, 8 women.
Mm-hmm.
Just doing some math here. The odds that, let's say, Rodney is cheating on his girlfriend, statistically, well, with a woman, I guess, low. Right?
What if 2 women were obsessed with him and then all the men hate him because the 2 women are obsessed with him?
Okay, let's play that out. I think the most likely thing, based on the demographics of who we've got here, if you're a single man, one of the 42, you see this other guy, Dr. Rodney Marks, he's in a band. He plays guitar and drums. He's an astrophysicist who was a rock star. He's kind of got it all going on.
He's got what, green hair?
Yeah. He's got his girlfriends who they're planning to get married, right? Most of these people don't have a partner there.
And they do allude to the fact that happy couples aren't appreciated, maybe. I can't remember how they phrased it. They alluded to the fact that people don't like seeing happy couples there.
Which totally makes sense,
Yeah.
right? I mean, let's say all 8 of those women were in relationships with 8 of the men there, which is statistically probably impossible. But let's just say that for the sake of argument. That leaves 34 men sitting there watching these 8 couples.
I mean, not everyone's going to be straight, so some of the men just might be.
Right. Okay. I'm just saying, like, the most it could possibly be.
Okay.
And you add into that 6 months here, getting toasty.
Getting toasty.
And you add into
Not
that.
in the right way. Getting toasty in the wrong way.
Well, add to that the alcohol. The alcohol culture there is baffling to me. The fact that people basically could say, hey, I'm going to be there for 6 months. I want to drink a bottle of tequila every day. I want to drink 5 bottles of tequila every day. And on top of that, just to keep piling on, there's somewhere in here it's mentioned they're at work for 8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
They're there for 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
So 16 hours a day, they're not at work. They're drinking. They're living their lives. They're looking at these happy couples thinking, man, I want what they have. That's motive, right? There's definitely motive there.
There's definitely potential for motive, but like I don't know. It feels like a really silly thing to do, like to drug a guy who might know about the drugs. What do you make of the doctor?
So we haven't talked about that. We should talk about that a little bit.
So there's one doctor on call. Weird that there was like 3 doctors in a row that had to be airlifted out for different medical reasons.
Oh my gosh, the doctor stories are
wild. One
ridiculous.
Doctor started to give herself chemo when she realized she had cancer. She was diagnosed with cancer while she was there.
Yeah. And that was apparently a movie with Susan Sarandon.
So anyway, we digress.
So the doctor in question. So first of all, the fact that you have one doctor for 50 people
seems, well, if your doctor was only dealing with 50 people, you'd be pretty happy.
That's true. But also the fact that 3 doctors in a row that we hear about got horribly ill. Right? This one had a ruptured disc in his back.
After a couple of days, he fell on the ice and ruptured a disc. So he was on medication, and there's kind of questions over whether he was taking self-medicating.
Which, I got to say, I've never had a ruptured disc. I have
Sounds
had
bad.
back issues. I've had lesser back issues. And if I had access to a cabinet full of narcotics.
I've ever heard.
What?
I've had back issues. I haven't been able to run every day with my back. I've had to take up yoga.
I had to take up yoga. But I also don't have a cabinet full of narcotics. What he has sounds way worse than what I've ever had.
It does. Maybe even
and the
worse
I-
than your little tooth pain.
Oh my gosh. And the idea of having to give like close medical attention in emergency situations to 49 other people while you're dealing with this crippling pain, maybe while you're high on the narcotics, he's definitely not at his best,
No.
right?
Okay. Overall, Jeff, we've discussed the ins and outs of this podcast. Would you recommend to a friend?
I would, and I have.
Already?
Hey, I talk to people.
But they have to listen to the podcast for the recommendation.
Okay. Well, I've recommended that people listen to this podcast and then go listen to The Secret History of Antarctica. And so I know we've been sort of ragging on it for not having like a satisfying conclusion to the case at the center of it. But I still feel like at the end of the day, there's so much interesting information here. And it's such a fascinating story. And something we say a lot, but it's a low time commitment, which is just true, right? 6 half-hour episodes that are dense with interesting stories.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would recommend to a friend, but disclaimer, don't go in there for the murder or the death and the crime, because that's not really the focus, but Antarctica is, and that was fascinating to listen to.
Yeah.
Jeff, as an aside for this one, I was looking up the psychological tests that you have to do to go to Antarctica. And I found one here on the American Museum of Natural History website, which feels like fairly solid.
Seems solid, yeah.
Okay. Rate your answer to each question. I'm going to find out your score. Are you ready?
Ready.
At some research stations, winter temperatures can reach minus 112 Celsius, minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit. How well do you handle being cold? 1 is not well, 3 is fairly well, and 5 is very well. You have a scale of 1 to 5.
All right, this is where I'm going to go back to the fact that I lived for many years in Wisconsin, Maine, Colorado, places where I remember it being as cold as 40 below zero Fahrenheit.
So 1, because you've ended up in California, so...
No, I have distinct memories of being a small kid and hearing that, hey, it's minus 40. You can't go outside and play in the snow, and me being real disappointed.
Okay.
So I think I'm whatever the best answer is on that one.
5. Antarctica experiences 3 to 6 months of complete darkness in winter. Would the lack of sunlight affect you? 1 is, I'd go a little crazy. 3 is, maybe I'll use a natural light lamp. And 5 is, I think it would be interesting.
No, I'd go a little crazy, for sure.
Fully crazy, or 2, like as in a teeny bit crazy? Like 1 is a little crazy.
All right. I will say that when I lived in New England and it was kind of gray and not that dark, but darker than it is in California for 6 months, by like March, I was in rough shape. So what's the bottom of the scale? 1?
1.
I'm going to say a 2.
Okay, you're going to 2. Ready for question number 3. Oh, I forgot to tell you, there's 6 questions. Winds of up to 300 kilometers per hour or 185 miles per hour have been recorded in Antarctica, and the sound is intense. Would this bother you? 1, I'd find it annoying. 3, I can tune it out. 5, that doesn't bother me. You definitely find it annoying. I think you need a -1 here.
Why? Why do you say that?
Because I feel like certain noises irritate you very easily.
Wow. What? Really?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. It's not going to not annoy me. I will say that. I do. I mean, maybe I don't have to share a story for each of these, but when I taught at a boarding school in Maine, I lived on the top floor
I feel like
of
we're
this
just
dorm.
traveling around in each answer. It's just like seeing into Jeff's life at different times.
I mean, you're asking me
Go
these
on,
questions,
go
and I'm explaining my
Just
answers.
Hurry it up there, Betsy.
Oh, okay. All right. I lived in this top floor of this dorm. So it was like the 3rd or 4th floor of this dorm. And it was on top of a hill in Maine in the winter. And the wind was just intense. And it's sort of cool in some ways. Like it's very dramatic. There's a little bit of like, oh, like, is this building going to blow away? Which I'd be curious in Antarctica because like they're not on solid ground, right? Like,
yeah, but I
on the
doubt
ice.
they're like high up.
I mean, I looked at a picture of this research center and it's a little high up.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm going to say middle on this one. 3?
I
Is
can
3 the
tune
middle?
it out. All right. I don't believe
Maybe,
you. I think you're lying.
You don't
but
believe
anyway.
it. What do you think I should be? 2?
Yeah, I'd say 2, but we'll keep 3. Rooms are comfortable, but space is tight. Could you live and work with just a few people for months at a time?
No. 1.
I didn't even give you the I need
No
my
story, just a
privacy.
1.
I hope I'll find some alone time. I can get along with anybody.
All right, 2. I'll be generous, but probably a 1.
No, you went 1 straight away there. You're not even getting an opportunity to change. Okay, 5. Crews working outside have to wear up to 7 layers of clothing. Do you have the patience for all those zippers? 1, I have little patience. 3, I'm fairly patient. 5, I'm very patient.
I'm going to go 5 on that one.
I mean, I don't understand what the issue with the zippers are. Like, as long as my kids aren't there and I don't have to deal with them getting them all on, I'm fine.
Yeah, or if it was buttons. If you just everything was
Oh.
buttons.
Buttons would be so annoying. Research stations have energy and water conservation programs. Could you get by with only 2 2-minute showers a week? 1, I couldn't wait that long. 3, maybe I'd get used to it. 5, I like roughing it.
1.
Really? Of all the things.
Love a good shower.
I mean, yeah, but like...
Every day. Every day.
Okay, let's find out your score. 17.
How'd I do?
If you get a score between 12 and 17, you're adventurous but prefer a cozy climate. Wouldn't you rather study European volcanoes or analyze DNA in a lab? There you go.
Yes. Yes, I would. How did you do?
I got 24. You're not quite ready.
24.
Yeah. You're not quite ready to winter in Antarctica, but you might consider spending a summer there, which I think is actually very apt. That's how I'd feel. But I am only 1 point away from being told to pack your long underwear. You're perfectly suited for the extreme cold and endless nights.
I feel like this is in sharp contrast to what we talked about in our preview episode, where it seemed like I was much more interested in doing this than you were.
I mean, every adventure is fun, no?
I think so. I would definitely go.
Oh, I'd definitely go.
I don't know that I'd make it 6 months.
No, I wouldn't winter there. All right, Jeff. That's it for today. Jeff, did you know that we're actually on Patreon at patreon.com/so-much-crime, so little time, where you can get early access to future shows? You can also get bonus content, Jeff. And guess what else? You'll help to support us in making this show, which is so fun.
What's the website again?
It's patreon.com/so-much-crime, so little time. That's the name of our podcast.
All right, Dee, what are we going to do next time?
Next time we're going back to Ireland to discuss a story that haunts a lot of people still to this day in Ireland. It's a story about shame and the Catholic Church. It's a story about a taboo subject, and it's just a story about the death of many, many babies and young mothers at the hands of the Catholic Church. And it's brought to you by BBC Radio 4. It's called The Home Babies.
That's next time on So Much Crime.
So little time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.